Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this because honestly, I'm done pretending everything was my fault. I'm Samantha, I'm 33, and yeah, I'm divorced. And before you start judging me, let me tell you exactly how this whole mess went down, because everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster, when really, I was just being realistic about what I wanted. So here's the thing about Ethan. He wasn't supposed to be forever, you know? I met him when I was 25 and had just finished dealing with a string of guys who were all talk and no commitment. Ethan was 22 when we met, fresh out of college, working some entry-level tech position, but here's what caught my attention. He was completely smitten with me from day one. This guy looked at me like I was some kind of goddess who had descended from heaven just for him. And let me be clear, I knew exactly what I was doing when I started dating him. Ethan was safe. He was the kind of guy who would never cheat, never leave, never give me any real problems. He had zero game with women, which meant I didn't have to worry about competition. Plus, he made decent money and actually wanted to get married. I tested him early on. I'd show up 30 minutes late to our dates just to see what he'd do. He'd just smile and say, no problem. Like it was totally normal. I canceled plans last minute when something better came up, and he'd just reschedule without complaining. It was honestly refreshing to be with someone who didn't give me attitude about every little thing. The best part was how eager he was to please me. Ethan would literally drop everything if I needed something. It was like having a personal assistant who was also sleeping with me. And honestly, after dealing with selfish guys for years, I thought I'd hit the jackpot, but there were things that annoyed me too. Ethan wanted to know everything about my day, my friends, my plans. At first, I thought it was sweet, but then it started feeling clingy. When I'd tell him he was being too needy, he'd apologize and back off. Which was good because I hate when guys get defensive about legitimate feedback. The proposal happened after we'd been together for 2 years. Ethan planned this whole elaborate thing at some fancy restaurant. And honestly, even in that moment, I remember thinking, well, this is happening now. I said yes, because Ethan was everything I thought I wanted in a husband. Stable, devoted, financially secure, and completely committed to making me happy. But even at our wedding, I found myself looking around, wondering if this was really it for me. Was I really going to spend the next 50 years with someone who asked permission before buying new shoes? Someone who got excited about grocery shopping together? Ethan was exactly who I thought he was. Predictable, safe, and completely devoted to me. And at 25, that seemed like everything I wanted. But by the time we'd been married for a year, I started realizing that predictable and safe might not be enough for the next 40 years of my life. 2 years into marriage, I brought up opening our relationship. I framed it as wanting to explore and grow, but honestly, I was already eyeing other men and felt trapped by monogamy. Ethan looked at me like I'd suggested we burn the house down. He immediately jumped to all these worst-case scenarios and started acting like I was asking him to share me with random strangers. I spent months wearing him down with articles, therapy sessions, and emotional manipulation. I knew Ethan was too inexperienced and insecure to find other partners while I could easily line up dates. My confidence proved right. I had multiple options within hours of updating my dating profile, while Ethan got maybe 3 matches in the first month. I felt validated watching him struggle while I had men lining up to take me out. I'd come home from amazing dates and check in with Ethan, knowing it tortured him but framing it as healthy communication. He'd try to hide his pain and put on a brave face, which honestly just made me feel superior. The guy who really caught my attention was Dylan. He was everything Ethan wasn't. Confident, spontaneous, a little bit dangerous. Dylan worked in sales, was always traveling, living this exciting life that seemed so glamorous compared to Ethan's. Routine of work, gym, home, repeat. When Dylan told stories about his adventures, I found myself hanging on every word. Dylan also didn't treat me like I was made of glass. If I was running late, he'd tease me about it instead of just accepting it. It was like verbal sparring, and I loved every minute of it. With Ethan, conversations were always so careful and considerate. With Dylan, they were electric. I started looking forward to my dates with Dylan more than anything else in my week. We'd meet at cool bars I'd never been to, places that felt sophisticated and adult in a way that my marriage to Ethan never did. Dylan would order wine for both of us without asking what I wanted. And somehow he always picked exactly what I was in the mood for. Ethan noticed the change in me, of course. I was happier, more energetic, more interested in intimacy when I came. home from my dates. He kept asking if I was okay, if something was wrong. It was exhausting having to reassure him constantly that my good mood wasn't somehow a threat to our marriage. The hardest part was the check-ins. Ethan insisted we tell each other about our dates. So I'd come home and give him these sanitized versions of my evenings while he shared his lack of progress in excruciating detail. Listening to Ethan talk about his failed attempts at dating was honestly painful. I tried to give him advice, but the truth was that Ethan's problem wasn't his approach, it was his entire personality. Things got complicated when Ethan started developing what he called a friendship with some woman from his work, Olivia, apparently. She was one of the few people who actually responded to his dating profile, but instead of going on a date, they just started talking all the time. Ethan claimed it was platonic, but I could tell he was getting emotionally invested. The irony wasn't lost on me that Ethan was getting jealous of my actual dates, while developing feelings for someone he wasn't even sleeping with. When I pointed this out, he got defensive and said it was completely different because they were just friends, right? I started paying closer attention to Ethan's phone habits and noticed he was texting with this Olivia person constantly. He'd smile at his phone. In a way, he never smiled at my texts anymore. When I asked about it, he'd get this weird look and change the subject. It was classic emotional affair behavior, but apparently when Ethan did it, it was just friendship. Meanwhile, my relationship with Dylan was getting more serious. We'd moved beyond casual dates to spending entire evenings together, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Dylan made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. He remembered details about my life that Ethan had forgotten years ago. I started comparing Ethan to Dylan constantly, and Ethan never came out favorably. Dylan was decisive where Ethan was wishy-washy. Dylan was spontaneous where Ethan needed to plan everything weeks in advance. Dylan made me feel desired and exciting, while Ethan made me feel like a comfortable piece of furniture. The more time I spent with Dylan, the more I realized that what I had with Ethan wasn't really love, it was habit. We'd built this life together based on compatibility and shared goals, but there was no passion, no electricity, no sense that we couldn't live without each other. By this point, I was basically living two separate lives. There was my life with Ethan, which felt like going through the motions of being married. Then there was my life with Dylan, which felt like who I was actually meant to be. Dylan had plans to start his own business, ambitions beyond just collecting a steady paycheck. When I was with him, I remembered that I used to have goals and dreams too. The hardest part was coming home to Ethan after spending time with Dylan. It was like switching from high definition to black and white. Ethan would ask about my evening in this careful, controlled way, and I'd give him the basic facts while keeping all the important details to myself. Ethan started asking more questions about Dylan specifically, which annoyed me because he never showed that level of interest in my other dates. I kept my answers vague because, honestly, it was none of his business. We'd agreed that polyamory meant trusting each other to make good decisions. What really bothered me was that Ethan was becoming increasingly needy and insecure. He'd want extra reassurance that I still loved him, that our marriage was still my priority. It was exhausting having to manage his emotions on top of everything else. I started feeling like his mother more than his wife. Meanwhile, Ethan's friendship with Olivia was getting more intense. He'd mention her constantly. Olivia said this, Olivia thought that. It was obvious he was developing real feelings for her. But when I pointed this out, he'd get defensive and accuse me of being paranoid. I decided to investigate and found Olivia's social media profiles. She was younger than me, probably around 28, and worked in healthcare administration. Cute in that generic, girl-next-door way that men seem to find so appealing. Her photos were all wholesome family gatherings and hiking trips, basically. She was everything I wasn't, sweet, uncomplicated, satisfied with a simple life. Watching Ethan light up whenever he talked about Olivia made me realize something important. He was capable of passion and excitement. He just wasn't capable of feeling those things about me anymore. The irony was that Ethan was doing exactly what I was doing with Dylan, but he was too much of a coward to admit it. I started pulling back from Ethan emotionally because, frankly, it felt pointless to invest energy in someone who was clearly investing his elsewhere. When he'd try to initiate conversations about our relationship, I'd give him short answers and change the subject. The breaking point came when Dylan started talking about relocating for business opportunities, maybe somewhere warmer with better networking possibilities. For the first time since I got married, I found myself imagining a completely different life for myself. What if I didn't have to stay in this marriage that felt more like a business partnership than a love story? I started researching Dylan's potential destinations, looking at job opportunities and cost of living. It felt thrilling and terrifying and completely different from the careful, practical way Ethan and I had always made decisions together. That decision got made for me sooner than I expected. One evening, I came home from a particularly amazing date with Dylan to find Ethan sitting at our kitchen table with this weird expression on his face. "We need to talk," he said, which immediately put me on the defensive. Ethan started going on about how our arrangement wasn't working, how he felt like we were drifting apart, how he missed feeling connected to me. Then Ethan said something that completely caught me off guard. He wanted to close our marriage and focus on rebuilding our relationship. Just like that, he expected me to give up everything I'd built with Dylan. I told Ethan I needed time to think about it, but honestly, my mind was already made up. I wasn't going back to that life, not when I'd finally found something real with someone who actually understood me. I started staying out later, spending more time with Dylan, basically checking out of my marriage completely. Ethan noticed the change immediately. He'd try to plan date nights or suggest weekend trips, clearly attempting to compete with what I had with Dylan, but it felt forced and desperate. The conversation I've been avoiding finally happened on a random Tuesday night. Ethan brought up the idea of taking a vacation together, just the two of us, to reconnect. And something about the way he said it, so hopeful and naive, made me realize I couldn't keep stringing him along. I told Ethan I wanted a divorce, not because of Dylan, not because of polyamory, but because we'd grown into different people who wanted different things. I expected him to argue with me, but Ethan just sat there for a long moment and then nodded like he'd been expecting it. "Is this about Dylan?" he asked. I told him it wasn't about Dylan specifically, but about the fact that Dylan had shown me what it felt like to be truly compatible with someone. Ethan and I had built a life together based on shared goals and mutual convenience, but we'd never had that spark. The divorce process was surprisingly smooth, probably because Ethan just wanted it to be over with. We hired one of those collaborative divorce lawyers who helped us divide everything without turning it into a war. Ethan got to keep the house, and I got enough money to start fresh somewhere new. What surprised me was how relieved I felt once we made the decision. All the guilt and anxiety I'd been carrying around just disappeared. Ethan moved out of our bedroom immediately, but stayed in the house until the paperwork was finalized. The one thing that bothered me was how quickly Ethan seemed to bounce back. I'd expected him to be devastated, maybe beg me to reconsider. Instead, he just accepted it and moved on like he'd been waiting for permission to stop trying. Ethan's friendship with Olivia became even more obvious during this time. She'd call the house sometimes, and Ethan would take the call in another room like I couldn't hear him laughing and talking for hours. The thing that really annoyed me was that Ethan seemed more animated and happy during those conversations than he'd been with me in months. About 3 months into the divorce proceedings, Dylan got the job opportunity he'd been hoping for, a position with a marketing firm in Phoenix that would basically double his salary. He asked if I'd consider moving with him, not as a live-in girlfriend necessarily, but just to see where things could go between us. The timing felt perfect. I was about to be officially divorced. I had enough money from the settlement to start over somewhere new, and I had someone who actually wanted to build a future with me. I told Dylan yes before I'd really thought it through completely. Ethan took the news about my move better than I'd expected. He just nodded and said he hoped I'd be happy, which felt anticlimactic after 5 years of marriage. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning in February. Ethan and I signed the papers, shook hands awkwardly, and that was it. Dylan and I left for Phoenix the following weekend. He'd already found us a beautiful apartment in a trendy neighborhood with great restaurants and nightlife. For the first few months, everything was perfect. Dylan and I fell into an easy routine of exploring our new city together, trying new restaurants, meeting interesting people through his work connections. But after about 6 months, I started noticing things about Dylan that bothered me, the way he'd flirt with waitresses right in front of me, or how he'd make plans without consulting me first. He'd dismiss my opinions during conversations with his friends. The biggest issue was that Dylan treated our relationship like it was still casual even though I'd moved across the country to be with him. He'd make comments about keeping our options open or not wanting to rush into anything serious. When I brought up the future, Dylan would change the subject or say we should just see how things developed naturally. The worst part was realizing that Dylan had never actually asked me to be exclusive with him. I just assumed that moving to Phoenix together meant we were in a committed relationship, but Dylan apparently saw it as an extended trial period where he could still date other people if he wanted to. I found out about Dylan's dating profile by accident, when his phone buzzed with a notification while he was in the shower. When I confronted him about it, he acted like I was being unreasonable for expecting exclusivity without explicitly discussing it. According to Dylan, we'd never had the conversation about being exclusive, so technically he wasn't doing anything wrong. That's when I started to understand that Dylan was exactly the kind of guy I'd dated before Ethan. Charming and exciting, but ultimately unwilling to commit to anything real. I tried to make it work for a few more months, but the magic was gone. Dylan's spontaneity started feeling selfish rather than exciting. His confidence started seeming like arrogance. All the things that had attracted me to him became irritating reminders of how naive I'd been. The final blow came when Dylan announced he was being transferred to Seattle for an even better position. When I asked if he wanted me to come with him, he hesitated just long enough to let me know the answer was no. Dylan said he thought it would be good for both of us to have some space to figure out what we really wanted, which was code for, I want to start fresh in Seattle without the complication of a girlfriend who has expectations. So there I was, 33 years old, divorced, living in a city where I knew nobody except my ex-boyfriend, who was about to move away. I'd given up a stable marriage with a decent man for an exciting relationship with someone who turned out to be just as unreliable as every other guy I dated before Ethan. Through mutual friends, I heard that Ethan was indeed dating Olivia seriously. They'd moved in together about 6 months after our divorce was finalized. Part of me wanted to reach out to Ethan, maybe apologize for how things ended, but I knew that conversation would be more for my benefit than his. 2 years later, I'm still in Phoenix, still single, still trying to figure out what went wrong with my life. I've got a decent job and a nice apartment and some friends, but nothing feels as solid or real as what I had with Ethan, even during our worst times. The hardest part is seeing Ethan's life play out on social media. We have mutual friends who post pictures from gatherings where Ethan and Olivia look genuinely happy together. And I mean actually happy, not just performing happiness for the camera like Ethan and I used to do. Ethan looks different in these photos, more confident, more relaxed, like he's finally comfortable in his own skin. Olivia posts these sweet little captions about their weekend adventures or how proud she is of Ethan's promotion at work. It's the kind of supportive, enthusiastic girlfriend energy I never gave him. What kills me is that Ethan is thriving without me in ways he never did during our marriage. He's gotten promoted twice since our divorce. He's taken up hiking and photography, hobbies I used to roll my eyes at when he suggested them. He looks happier and healthier than I've ever seen him. The worst part was running into them at a restaurant a few months ago. I was there with a guy I'd been seeing casually, and Ethan and Olivia were having dinner at a corner table. They didn't see me at first, so I got to watch them interact naturally. Ethan was animated and funny in a way I'd forgotten he could be. When Ethan finally noticed me, he gave me a polite wave and a genuine smile. Not the fake smile you give to someone you hate, but the real smile you give to someone you genuinely wish well. His complete lack of lingering resentment made it clear that he'd moved on completely. Olivia was gracious too. When Ethan introduced us, she was warm and friendly without being fake about it. They told me about their recent trip to Montana and their plans to buy a house together. Ethan mentioned that he'd started hiking regularly and discovered he actually loved being outdoors. They seemed like actual partners, building a life together based on shared interests and mutual respect. Walking away from that encounter, I felt something I hadn't expected. Genuine happiness for Ethan mixed with crushing regret about what I'd thrown away. Not because I wanted to be back with him, but because I realized I'd never appreciated what we had when I hadn't. I started thinking about all the ways I dismissed Ethan's attempts to connect with me. All the times I'd made him feel like his interests and personality weren't enough to keep me engaged. Ethan had been offering me exactly what Olivia was clearly enjoying, a partnership with someone who wanted to build a life together. Now I'm 33, single, living in a city where I have no real history or deep connections. Watching my ex-husband build the kind of life I'd always claimed to want but never knew how to appreciate when I had it. And the worst part is that I know it's entirely my own fault. I chose excitement over stability, passion over partnership, chemistry over compatibility. I convinced myself that love was supposed to feel like a constant high instead of a steady, reliable warmth. I threw away something real for something that looked better from the outside but had no substance underneath. Ethan didn't fail me as a husband. I failed him as a wife. And now he's getting to experience what marriage is supposed to feel like with someone who actually deserves him. Someone who sees his kindness as strength instead of weakness. His reliability as a gift instead of a burden. I can't even be angry about it because they both deserve their happiness. Ethan deserves someone who appreciates him from day one instead of figuring it out. Years too late, the only person I can be angry with is myself, for being too mature and selfish to recognize what I had when I had it. So here I am watching from the sidelines as my ex-husband lives his best life with someone who actually deserves him well. I'm still trying to figure out how to build something real with someone new. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever will because the problem was never about finding the right person, it was about learning how to be the right person for someone else. But that's a lesson I learned too late to do Ethan any good and probably too late to do myself any good either.